Uh, we're going to continue the session. My name's Steve Gold. I'm with IBM. And I have the honor to introduce the next section. It's on big data. Anybody here ever hear of big data? So I have a better question. Did any of you know that there was small data? I keep wondering about that term. Some marketer clearly had to coin that phrase. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is created every single day. Now, I don't know about you, but that didn't have a lot of meaning to me. So I did a little research, and that equates to about 170 newspapers delivered to every man, woman, and child on the planet every single day. So imagine getting 170 papers stacked up. Someone says, I have a question. The answer's in the stack of papers. Go find it. You know, day one, I'm thinking, I can do that. Day two, I'm up to 340 papers. Get a little bit more challenging. 10 days later, forget it. Right? The volume of information has overrun my ability to ingest. So you're going to have 3 different presentations in the next 80 minutes looking at big data, but more importantly, looking at how big data is being put to work. The way I like to think about big data is oil in the ground, right? Big oil. Well, oil isn't really useful in the ground. It doesn't really serve a purpose. But if we extract it, we refine it, all of a sudden that oil becomes really interesting in terms of how it can power us. And I think big data has that same kind of analogous positioning, you know, that allows us to get better insights, better information. So you're going to hear from 3 presentations. You'll hear from IBM, you'll hear from MasterCard, you'll hear from the Gilt Group. I'll introduce each of the speakers. And by all means, let's keep this engaging and entertaining. So on the IBM side, I swear to God, I have the best job in IBM. I get to play with some very cool technology, but more importantly, it's technology that I think is going to redefine, for this audience, the consumer experience. It was 2 years ago that Watson made its debut on Jeopardy. Anybody here have seen Jeopardy? Gone to YouTube, watched Jeopardy? It was really interesting. 35 million people tuned in to watch something that had never been done before, right? A computer, literally, that can navigate the complexities of human speech, right? Interpret what was being said in context, and then very quickly come back with a response and confidence associated with the response to determine if, in fact, it had the right answer. And it was riveting because systems had never been able to accomplish this. We'll talk about why that was such a challenge and why it was such an important feat, but none of this would have been able to really come to fruition if not for the information explosion. And clearly what we've seen is kind of this alignment of a somewhat perfect storm, you know, where we have the proliferation of social mediums and sites, and clearly it is awe-inspiring the amount of information we as individuals are willing to share every single day. We have mobility, right, and the proliferation of mobile devices. Anybody here have a cell phone? Okay. 6 billion devices, right, already in existence on a planet of 7 billion people. We have the Internet of Things, 1 trillion connected devices, okay, across the internet. You know, think about everything, not just from tweets and chats, right, and PC connections, right, but all of the sensors and devices and cameras, right, that are out there constantly connected, constantly sharing, constantly sending information across. And all of this becoming ubiquitous through cloud-type access. So with this proliferation of information, and when we talk about volume, we recognize 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. Pause for a second. Think about, you know, what that really means since the beginning of time, right? There's an explosion of data. 80% of that data is unstructured. What do we mean by that? Well, it doesn't reside in a nice form. It doesn't reside in rows and columns and binary fashion. It's text, right? It's emails, it's chats, it's blogs, it's tweets, it's customer surveys, it's forms that we fill out. It's information that hasn't been historically categorized in a way that computers can take advantage of it. And in fact, most computers that are out there rely on a relatively small subset of information, right, that it uses to run a business and to make decisions. And we know that's a problem. In fact, we know that when we survey executives, 1 and 2, will tell us that they don't have the information they need to make an informed decision at the point of action, right? Or they have the information, but they actually can't access it or get to it in a form, right, that's usable. But those that can, organizations that have embraced analytics have overall outperformed those organizations that have not, right? And when I say outperform, whether we look at top line revenue growth, bottom line, earnings per share, return on assets, return on equity, almost any metric that you can imagine, organizations that have learned how to embrace and to harness big data, right, via analytical methodologies, are just doing much better than those that haven't. And this is the scary part, right? This is where we are in the continuum of big data, right? And it's not just volume, right? What you see here is velocity, right? So the minute we start to think, hey, we can get our arms around this, we can handle this, you realize this is accelerating, right? And it's variety, right? We just heard a couple of minutes ago, right, the volume of information uploaded to YouTube. I think it's 70 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute, plus or minus. Now, a lot of that is what we saw and isn't necessarily going to be mined for greater insight, but a lot of it is, right? IKEA uploads how-to videos, right? There's insights in that can be gleaned and gained for advantage, right, and for information. And so with this volume, velocity, and variety, then we also have to deal with veracity. How good is the data, right? We always heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. How do we deal with that? Traditional systems, right, haven't dealt with that all too well. So it was 2006, IBM took on what it calls a grand challenge. Anybody remember the last grand challenge? Right, Deep Blue, right, the chess-playing computer, Garry Kasparov, IBM defeated him. Right, now today, I'm sure if I go to the App Store, that it's probably 22 different apps I can download, right, that could defeat the grand champion in chess. But at the time, right, a computer had never been able to demonstrate that logic and reasoning. This was exactly the same situation. This started, actually, well, it starts with most good ideas start. It started in a bar. No kidding, right? Group of folks having dinner. Everybody gets up, went into the bar. A number of IBM folks followed, curious as to why everybody was going in. And this is when Ken Jennings was on his winning streak. He won 74 games in a row on Jeopardy, right? And so this was like game 72, and it kind of struck a chord, and they said, hey, what if a computer could actually compete, on Jeopardy? What would that take? And it launched the grand challenge that 4.5 years later, in February 2011, came forward in a very public way, right, on that show. And everybody says, hey, you knew you were going to win, and I can tell you nothing was further from the truth. Right, because it had never been done, and the Jeopardy folks were very controlling as it relates to leveling the playing field. So in Jeopardy, Watson was analyzing about 200 million pages of data in a little under 3 seconds. Anybody here do that? Okay. Little better than me. Why 3 seconds? Well, that's how long it took to buzz in, and there was actually a mechanical buzzer that was built for Watson. So once Alex Trebek finished the question, which is 3 seconds, right, Watson pretty much had to know if it understood the question and had a response that it felt confident enough that it would buzz in. And that's physically what happened over the course of a couple days. Well, there was an awakening, obviously, after Jeopardy for us that said, wow, this is really interesting. What are the commercial implications? Now, I always get the question, well, you must have known when you started the project in 2006, right, that there was commercial gain. And I can tell you we didn't, because we didn't know if we could even do this. So what we saw was opportunities starting just after the show to take this into new places and into new ways. We began with medicine in late 2011. We moved into financial services in early 2012. And we continued to accelerate and advance the use and application of this technology. I'm going to give you a little demonstration in just a couple of minutes of what this looks like and what the future of the consumer experience might turn out to be. Now, Watson is a system of systems, 41 subsystems in total, cobbled together. And here's a little secret. There's no one killer technology. In fact, the technologies that make up Watson have been around for an extended period of time. Natural language. Now, this is not speech recognition. This is actually understanding, right, the spoken word. It's putting content in context. It's understanding idiosyncrasies, colloquialisms. This is computational linguistics. This has been studied for decades. Right? The second thing that Watson does, it's able to ingest vast amounts of data. I mentioned for Jeopardy 200 million pages. and it's able to very quickly cull through that data, right, finding the pertinent passage or response, weighting it with confidence through this hypothesis process, and bringing back what it believes to be the top candidate answers for the question or query that was being asked. And that obviously happens very fast. But the coolest thing, at least for me, is it's a system that learns. Right? It's a system that literally the way that we instantiate an instance of a Watson is we give it training questions. Right? So in the case of healthcare, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, we literally we gave Watson 25,000 training questions. And with each iteration, with each new insight, it got smarter. Right? And what I will share with you, a little foreshadowing, is once we got through the first set of medical cases, it actually started learning on its own. Right? It actually started to understand, right, much the way you would teach someone from the second to third to fourth to fifth grade. By the time I get to fifth grade, I'm building upon the first several years of my education. Watson, we found, much faster, is building upon its first set of educational aspects. So why is it so hard for computers to understand human language? We'll take the passage on the right here. Right? If you take this literally, right, in leadership is an art that surely Jack Welch has proven himself to be a master painter during his tenure at GE. What would you say Jack Welch was? He's a master painter, right? Computer is literal. It's saying, hey, he's got to be, because that's what it says. He's Picasso, Renoir, right? He's clearly one of the greats. But yet, when we read that as individuals, none of us struggled, right? We quickly made the connection, the inference that this is a way to describe Jack in a more colorful term. And the human language at large, it's challenging. I mean, how can a house burn up as it burns down? Right? We don't even think about this, right? I say that, you go, well, of course it does. Computers go, that's illogical. Noses shouldn't run and feet shouldn't smell. Right? Clearly that's opposite. And then you start to compound this with all of the issues of industry and the industry jargon and the taxonomies and the ontologies that you have to understand to navigate this. And you realize just getting over natural language is a big deal, right, in the world of computers. All right, so here's a test. From the Jeopardy annals, the question is from the Lincoln blogs, Treasury Secretary Chase just submitted this to me for the first time. Guess what, pal? This time I'm accepting it. Okay, what is it? Resignation, of course. Right, great answer. Got it really quickly. So we're sitting there, and we're asking this question, trying to explain how natural language works to a group of fifth graders. And in the back of the room, when we ask that question, what is it? Girls like, I know. And we're going, wow, that's really impressive. We go, okay, what is it? She goes, it's a friend request. So all of a sudden, you begin to realize that putting content into context actually isn't that easy, right? It really depends on the point of view and what's being asked. So we are on the cusp of something that I suspect we will only see once in our lifetime, right? And that is a whole new era of computing, right? So IBM began 100 years ago in tabulation. 1954, we really revolutionized programmatic computing with the presence of Fortran. Right? And much of what we know about computing today, what we've all grown up with, is programmatic in nature. Right? So it runs our businesses. We have ERP systems, we have customer systems, we have HR systems, and they serve a great purpose. And for 60, 65 years now, it's what we've come to think about, right, about computing. Now it gets smaller, it gets faster, right? It presents itself in new forms. The era of cognitive computing has a whole different set of characteristics. So just a minute ago, we had the presenter from Google. Okay, so what Google is to search, what we've gone to know in programmatic, right, the cognitive era becomes to discovery. Right? So Watson is very much a discovery-driven type environment. It puts content in context, it goes out and evaluates possible responses, it weights them with confidence, it learns as it goes, and it brings back what it believes to be, right, the correct set of insights. The cognitive era is not programmatic or deterministic in nature. It's probabilistic. So deterministic. Here, little test. 2 plus 2 is, anybody here say 4? Right, okay, we all did. Watson would have said maybe. Now, everybody chuckles because they say, well, then Watson's not very smart. But what Watson's saying is it really depends. 2 plus 2 is 4 if, in fact, the question pertains to mathematics. But if I was talking to a group of automotive engineers in Detroit and I said 2 plus 2, they may be thinking it's a car configuration, 2 front seats, 2 back seats. If I'm talking to a family psychologist, 2 plus 2 could be the family unit, right? 2 parents, 2 children. Anybody go to Vegas? 2 plus 2 is a well-known poker strategy. So it really starts to depend. When I think about cognition, I think about probabilistic. I think about more than one possible response. I think about bringing back information that's relevant to my request. I think about a system that's not programmed, that's literally taught, right? And I think about a system that's not constrained to structured data, but a system that ultimately can take in unstructured and rich media data as well.
There are over 12,000 diseases in the world. Some take years to diagnose and treat. How can doctors find insights in a body of medical knowledge that doubles every 5 years? New solutions based on IBM Watson are being developed to help doctors analyze a patient's history, symptoms, and the latest medical literature to make faster, more accurate diagnoses.
Hello, my name is Watson.
Let's build a smarter planet.
So when you think about the 12,000 diseases that were referenced, when you think about the fact that medical information doubles every 5 years, when you think about yourself in a waiting room with 10 people, realizing 2 out of 10 of you will be misdiagnosed, you begin to realize that this may be a good place to start to think about this technology. And so we pointed Watson in medicine for all the right reasons to really improve the quality of care that ultimately can be delivered, recognizing that Watson had some unique characteristics. Right, that ability to take massive amounts of data and quickly understand and digest and apply it. And in fact, that's what we've been doing since we started the commercialization effort. We exist today, for example, at the Cleveland Clinic, helping medical students prepare for the U.S. medical license exam. So as they learn from Watson, Watson learns from them. We're working with researchers to advance the time it takes to bring new therapies to market. We've successfully, in the first pilots, advanced it from 3 years to 10 months. Think about the possibilities for disease treatments if we can accelerate that understanding. We're working with the oncologists at Memorial Sloan Kettering who are using Watson in the treatment assessment for cancer patients. Cancer is the #1 cause of death in the world. So that's a pretty meaningful place to start to look at where we apply Watson. But what's next? You know, you've heard today from a variety of speakers. I mean, there's clearly a shift in demographics. There's a shift in social behavior. The millennials have a very different social footprint than the baby boomers that are retiring at an alarming rate. I talked a little bit about mobility. Just a minute ago, we were starting to think about you know, the whole social implications. 2.5 billion active accounts at just these 3 sites alone. And so what we said is, you know, boy, lots of information. You know, instead of quality of care, what would this mean to quality of life? So I'm going to go through in about a minute, because we're just about out of time here. And I'm going to give you a sense for what the possibilities of this technology might be in affecting the customer experience. So imagine Melissa, a young professional on her smartphone, you know, tweeting, posting, surfing, running her life for all practical purposes, and she gets a news feed from her Facebook account from her bank. Now, normally Melissa would ignore these, but all of a sudden Melissa says, hey, what is this thing about emergency savings? Never really thought about that. Live, you know, kind of paycheck to paycheck. And like to learn more. Now, normally what she would receive when she clicked on that is some promotion or some offer, some product information. But in this case, Melissa actually wants to ask some questions. So she interacts with Watson, and she says to Watson, why shouldn't I just use my checking account for emergency savings? Now, Watson, very quickly in the background, it goes through the history of the individual, the products, articles, forums, blogs, quickly assesses all of that and brings back a response for Melissa. Now again, Watson is not deterministic. It brings back a number of possible answers. It weights them with confidence. Melissa wants to learn more about the top response. She can read about that. And if she wants, she can further investigate and drill down. So Watson's completely transparent, right? It's a humble genius. It doesn't think it knows what Melissa wants. It's trying to partner with her and present her with all the possible information. And at that point, you know, Melissa says, well, what's the difference between a high interest and a regular account? So she continues that interrogatory. And the moment she gets that response, her husband calls. Hey, life happens, right? She gets interrupted. She has a conversation with her husband, Lamar. She hangs up, she forgot what she was doing with the bank, and she goes about her life. A week later, she's sitting on the couch, she logs in on her tablet to her bank to check her account balance, and it quickly prompts her and says, hey, would you like to continue the conversation that we were having about emergency savings account? She says, sure. Right, so she continues the conversation, she picks up, she asks additional questions. She's talking about, how much money should I keep for emergency savings? And one of the things that's nice, without her leaving the application, she could actually launch into a company's tools. Many of you have tools and resources and calculators that are up on the web. So she can go and she can calculate the fact that she's well behind in her savings and she needs to get going. And then she can continue right back with a question and answer, iterative type speech with Watson, and literally transact the actual opening of an account from here. So at this point, Watson's going to say, hey, I know some information, but I respect your privacy. Can I use that information? And by the way, if you give me a couple of additional answers, I'll go ahead and complete the forms for you, and we'll get this account opening. So, how do you want to, fund this? And Melissa asks another question about, how much does it require to open the account? And then she asks the question about, Watson says, hey, would you like your husband, Lamar, on the account? She says, of course I want Lamar on the account. And she completes the transaction. So think about what just happened. Melissa in control, right? A system that knows her, that engages her, and empowers her in a way that today doesn't happen. Right? In the best possible circumstance, I would have talked to a bank representative, but then I'm beholden to them knowing all the information and being able to navigate the way I want to direct the conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude my presentation